My wife sat down and she wrote this poem, and I'd like to read it to you as an introduction to Pastor Golden. For 76 months and 28 days, there has been a man in our church who daily prays for the builders and boomers, millennials and Xers, and who makes more visitation calls than those telemarketers. He plans bus trips and luncheons, mission trips and tours. He and his better half, Shirley, live a theme that endures. Finish strong is his motto in every event, and he is known to all as that whistling, energetic gent. While he may be somewhat challenged on the vertical end, his church family is blessed by the special poems he has penned. He loves numbers and quizzes and varied room arrangement, and drives bus like a pro to many an entertainment. This man and his dear wife are a gift to our church. To find a kinder, humbler couple, we long would have to search. There is wisdom in his counsel and a sincere love in his heart. From the truth of God's word, he will never depart. So, we are thankful for the way God gave us these servants golden, and pray now that his message will your heart and mind embolden.
This morning I'd like to tell you the story of it's written in Megillah. I could read it. It was a scroll that was written years ago, a story that has been told hundreds and hundreds of times, a story that you have read, a story that's in the Bible. You'll find it in the book just before Job. Let me tell you that story. It's a little bit long, and I hope you have some patience. And at the end of the story, I would like to make some application. And so the story goes back to the time of Persia. King Ahasuerus, others knows him as Xerxes, but I'm going to refer to him as King Ahasuerus. He was king of the kingdom of the Persians and the Medes, and it ranged all the way from India all the way down to Ethiopia. It had 127 provinces that were part of that province, and he was a rich king and a great king. And in the third year of his reign, he wanted to have a feast. You have to understand that the Persians were known for their elaborate, fantastic feasts. And this feast throughout all the province was going to last 180 days. That's 6 months. And he gathered all the royalties and all the officials and all the satraps and the governors of all the 127 provinces, and he put on this great big feast. He showed all the riches, and it was a feast that lasted a long time. And at the end of that 180 days, he put on another feast in the city of Shushan. It's also referred to as Susa. It was the citadel. It was the winter capital of the city or of the kingdom of Persia. And he put on a week-long feast there, and it was elaborate. They were known for their decorations. They had the gardens with fine linen and all different colors. The mosaic, the pavement itself was a mosaic of marble and granite and alabaster, and there was gold and silver. It was a beautiful setting, and he did the very best during this week-long feast. That he invited everybody in Shushan, the capital city there, whether you were rich or poor, whether you were famous, just the common people, they come, and that was an elaborate feast. But what was known there was the heavy drinking, and the king brought out his wine. Everybody in the city had their own goblet. It was made of gold, and no two goblets were alike. And the rule was no one had to drink, but no one was stopped to drink, and he was given orders by his officials that whatever the men want to drink, they could drink as much as they want. Well, you can imagine at the end of that week, there was a lot of drunkenness and inebriation and merriment, and the king was drunk, and everybody was drunk. And he thought the idea, there was a party also going over in the other side of the palace where the ladies would meet, and Queen Vashta, a beautiful young woman, the queen of Persia, was entertaining the ladies over in that section of the palace. And the king had a bright idea to bring his beautiful young woman, Queen Vashti, over to the party. And you can let your imagination go. You can imagine what he wanted her to do and how he wanted to parade her beauty, either with little clothes or a lot of clothes, we do not know. But he asked the 7 servants that were working for him, that were high-ranking officials, if they would go over to the palace and tell Vashti, the queen, to come to this party and parade her beauty in front of all these drunken men. Well, they went. And Queen said, I am not going. She said, no. She said, no to the king. You don't say no to the king, even if you're the queen. And so the servants came back and said, she's not coming. The king said, what do you mean she's not coming? He got real angry. As we tell the old story, you will see how many times the king, wrath, took the best of him. So he got all his wise men together, and wise men that were known to give counsel during that time. And he asked him, what should we do in this situation? Because the queen would not come to the banquet. And there were 7 of them, and the chairman of that group of wise men was a man by the name of Memucan. And he said, this is serious stuff. The queen didn't only wrong you, King Ahasuerus, but she wronged everybody else in the kingdom. For once this gets out, all the women of the kingdom will rise up and say, well, I'm not going to listen to my husband, and we would lose respect, and something has to be done. And he said, this is what I suggest that you do, King. I would make a decree. Now, you understand, when a decree in the empire of the Persians and the Medes were set, it could not be revoked. We call it the law of the Medes and the Persians. Once that was written in law, nothing could be changed. And so he recommended to the king, why don't you send a decree out to all the land, the 127 provinces, and let it be known that we're going to take the position of the queen from her, we depose her. No longer will she come to you as the queen. And we'll find someone else that is better than her to be your queen. Now, the party in all of this took place in the 3rd year of the reign of King Ahasuerus. And he thought that was a great idea. And so he had the scribes come, and they wrote a decree, they wrote a law, and they sent it throughout all the provinces of the Persian Empire that the queen was disposed and dealt with. And this will remind every wife in the kingdom that they ought to pay respect and honor to their husband. And the king thought that was a good idea, and so he sent it all out. And chapter 1 ends with the fact that here was a king, he had no queen. Well, in chapter 2 of our story, the king gets sobered. He realizes what was happening, and now he realizes he has no queen. And the wise men, the various eunuchs said, I think this is what we ought to do to get a queen. Let's have a beauty contest. And let's get all the beautiful virgins throughout all the province of 127 provinces, from all the way from India all the way down to Ethiopia. And let's bring all these beautiful ladies in, and then you can select what queen you want. And the king thought, well, that was a grand idea. Now, there was a man by the name of Mordecai. He was an official that sat in the gate. That's where most of the business was done, in the citadel, and he was part of the leadership of that thing. And he was a Jew. And he was the great-grandson of Kish, a Benjamite. And Kish and his family were deported from Israel in 586 in that time and taken into various parts of the kingdom. Well, now, since the Babylons have been destroyed, the kingdom now is under the reign of the Persians and the Medes. And so there are Jews spread out throughout the whole province that were there. Many of them have returned to Israel, but there were many, many, many like Mordecai and others that did not return to Israel, but were still in the land. Now you understand that Persia is a very ungodly country. Persia is a pagan country. And Mordecai was a Jew. He did not reveal his identity. No one knew he was a Jew. And he raised up a girl. Her name was Hadassah. Her mom and dad died. And it was really his uncle's daughter, Mordecai's uncle's daughter. And he agreed to bring her up as his own daughter. And he told his daughter, Hadassah, who is Esther. And he told Esther, this young virgin, do not identify, do not let people know that you are a Jew. And so Esther was obedient and lived that way. And all the girls, all the young virgins that were brought in from all over the province, it covered a mass area. And Esther was also chosen. She lived in Shushan. And she was also chosen to be part of the beauty contest. And so she went. There was a guy by the name of Haggai, was his name. He was the keeper. He was the person in charge of this beauty contest. And he was responsible to prepare all the preparation for these girls so that they would look as beautiful and present themselves as wonderful they could to the king. And Esther came, and right away, Haggai took a liking to her. He found favor. She indeed was a beautiful woman, and she had a great personality, and everybody liked her, and he gave her special permission or special a place to live in the palace where the contest was going to be held. And he gave her 7 choice maidens that were going to care for her. And everybody liked her. He gave her special food. All the other girls that were involved in this contest, they thought Esther was just special. Everybody thought she was real special. Well, the preparation took a long time for a queen to be found, and there was an elaborate preparation. There were 6 months of the ladies bathing themselves in oil of myrrh. There was another 6 months that followed where various perfumes were used, and it was all in preparation to make them as beautiful as they could to go to the king. Now, they had one time to go to the king. He was the judge. He was the one that was going to decide who was going to take Queen Vashti's place. And so when they went before the king, they would go in the evening. They could take whatever they want. They could take a bouquet of flowers. They could take jewelry. They could take some other people with them. They could decide whatever they want because they want to make the best impression they could to go to the king. And so one by one they went, and once they went to the king and they left the next morning, they went into another place of the palace, not to meet the other girls that haven't gone in, so there was no, you ought to do this, this is what I did, or they had one chance, and they went over to the other place. Well, it was time for Esther, for her time to go to the king. And she didn't take anything extra except what Haggai recommended. She went before the king that night, King Ahasuerus, and well, it was love at first sight. I mean, Queen Esther is beautiful. As soon as he saw her, now he's seen some of the most beautiful ladies of the province, but when he saw Esther, he fell in love with her. And he made her queen. He put a crown on her head. It was a great coronation. The whole day was set apart. It was called the Feast of Esther. The whole kingdom knew that Esther was chosen to be the queen, and it was a special day. Now, you might think in this story that might be the end of the story. They live happily ever after. But it's not the end of the story. It's really just the beginning of the story. Now, before chapter 2 ends, there's a little story that I need to tell you that's really important. Just tuck it away in your mind because it's going to come up later in the story. Mordecai, as I said, was one who sat in the gate of the city. And while he was doing business there, he just happened to overhear two of the eunuchs conspiring to kill the king. Their name was Bigthan and Teresh. They hated the king. And they were the doorkeeper of the king, so they had easy access, and they planned this when they're going to do it, what day they're going to do it. Anyway, Mordecai hears about this plot. And so he tells Esther, who is now the queen. Now remember, I told you that the party that was in chapter 1 was in the 3rd year of the king reign. Esther was crowned in the 7th year. So 4 years have passed. And he tells Esther the conspiracy of these two guys that they're going to kill the king. And so Esther tells the king. The king investigates it. And sure enough, these two guys were going to do it. And so he had them executed on what is called the gallows. Now, the gallows in the Persian time was like really a pole, a sharp pole. And they would impale the body of that person. It was barbaric. It was a cruel way to deal with people. And they would raise it high up and sort of a reminder, the guy that does this. So he hung him on the gallows. He impaled him on the gallows. And it was carefully recorded in the Chronicle of the King, as everything was carefully recorded what the king did. It was a record of that. So anyway, chapter 2 ends with that story. Chapter 3, we find the introduction of Haman and his evil plot. Haman was the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. Now, I need to stop and tell you a little bit so you understand. Years before, centuries before, the Israelites killed the Amalekites. And their king was Agag. And so all the descendants after Agag were called the Agagites. And there was bitter hostility between the Israelites and the Agagites. And Haman was a descendant of the Agag. He hated these Jews, and of course the Jews hated them. And so the king, for whatever reason, going to honor Haman and make him second in command, viceroy, prime minister of all the kingdom, next to the king, this wicked Haman. And he said, whenever Haman goes out into the public square, out into the public, everybody has to bow down to him. Everybody either have to stand and give him respect. And so, as he went out, Haman, who now had this honored position upon him, as he went out into the Shushan, into the citadel area, of course, everybody bowed down to him. But Mordecai, he wouldn't bow down to him. And all the servants said, hey, Mordecai, what is it? The law is you're supposed to bow down to Haman like he's the king. And you're not bowing down. What is it with you? I'm not going to do it. Day after day, Haman comes out, everybody bowed down to him, but Mordecai would not bow down to him. What's with it with Mordecai? The servants would keep asking him. And then he finally told them, because he kept it a secret until then, I'm a Jew. And our custom is we don't bow to people like Haman. We have one person we bow down to. And so the servants probably wasn't happy. They had to do the bow. What Mordecai like? So they went to Haman and said, there's this guy, Mordecai. He doesn't bow down. And so the next time Haman went out into the area, he kept an eye on Mordecai, who sat in the city gate doing his business. Sure enough, Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. And that made him mad. I mean, he really got angry. And he decided right then and there, I'm not only going to kill Haman, I'm going to kill all of his descendants, all the Jews, because he knew now he was a Jew. So this Haman went to the king, had direct access to him, and said to the king, you know, there's this group of people in your kingdom that they don't bow down. They have their own laws. It's not good that they really live. My recommendation is that we kill them all. And I have 10,000 talents. Haman was very rich. He said, I'll give to you so that this can be executed throughout all the kingdom. King Ahasuerus said, okay, if that's what you want to do, I'll let you do it. You keep your money. You write the decree. I'll give you my signet ring. You have the authority. Whatever you decide to do, it will be law. The law of the Medes and the Persians. And you can destroy and kill all of the people that you were talking about. Now, before Haman went into the king, the Persians were known for their belief in fate. Things just happen. And they rely a lot on fate. And so they cast the pur. It was like a lot. It was called the pur. And he threw the pur down a couple of times. And the date that he picked was the 13th day of the 12th month. When he went into the king to make this a decree, it was the first month of that year. And so he made the decree and he sent it out that every Jew living in the 127 provinces on the 13th day of the 12th month, the enemies can kill them, destroy them, annihilate them. It was to be a complete genocide. Get rid of all the Jews throughout all the known world at that time. And it was sealed with a signet and the authority of the king. Horses were bred to get this message out throughout all the citadel. The decree or the copy, of course, all the people throughout all of the province, when they heard it, many of them did the same thing. You could imagine the mourning and the weeping and the sackcloth. And it's a terrible day. On the 13th day of the 12th month, we're all going to be killed. The people are going to rise up and annihilate all of us and take all our possession. And so one of the servants happened to see Mordecai in the gate, knowing that he was official, in sackcloth and ashes. And he goes to tell Esther about Mordecai is in sackcloth and ashes. Now, like a lot of important people and executives, sometimes she was isolated. She had no idea what was going on. She was in a different world, a different part of the palace. And so she said, look it. She had a servant by the name of can't remember his name, to you go out and take these clothes, a fresh set of clothes, and give them to Mordecai, because he knew there was a relationship. And so the servant went out to Mordecai and said, Queen wants you to have these new set of clothes. And he refused. I'm not going to do it. So he goes back, and the servant again, she said, go find out what's the issue with Mordecai. And so the servant goes out, and he talks to Mordecai, and Mordecai said, I'm in ashes, in sackcloth, because of the decree that was sent out that all the Jews are going to be killed. And take this copy of this decree and go back into the palace and tell the queen to go to the king and beg him to revoke this thing, because if not, we're all going to die. So the servant goes back into the queen house and gives the copy of the letter and said the king wants you to go, or the queen wants you to go to the king to plead his case. And she said, don't you understand that anybody that approaches the king without being called, if they go into the inner court and they weren't asked to come there, there's one rule: he dies. And I haven't been called for these 30 days. The only exception is if the king has favor, he will put out his scepter and you can approach. But she said, it's too risky to do. You go back and tell Mordecai it's not that easy. So the servant goes back, tells Mordecai again that the queen said, no, it's too risky. You can't do it. And then Mordecai said to the servant, look it, you tell the queen that just because she's in the palace, that she's not going to escape. And if help doesn't come from somewhere else, perhaps she's in this position to be the queen for such a time like this. She's not going to escape death. She's going to be part of this. So the servant goes back. The servant goes back to the queen. And Esther said, okay, I'll do it. But you go back and tell Mordecai to get all the Jews in Shushan, to get all the Jews together to fast. Don't eat, don't drink for 3 days, and I'll get all the people in the palace here, all my servants. We won't eat or drink for 3 days, and I'll go to the king. If I perish, I'll perish. And so chapter 4 ends with them fasting. Chapter 5 begins with the queen. On the 3rd day of the fast, she puts her robe on. She's real nervous. She's going to go into the king. She goes into the inner court, what is called the inner court. Her heart is beating. She's really nervous. She knows that she might not be, the king hasn't asked her to come in 30 days. It's a very risky thing that she is doing, but she knows she has to do it, and she knows she wants to do it. And so she approaches the king, and the king holds out the scepter to such a beautiful young woman. And she approaches the king, and she touches the top of the scepter. And the king said, Queen, what is your wish? What do you want? Tell me. I'll give it to you up to the half of the kingdom. And she said, O king, if it would please you, if I find favor in your eye, would you and Haman come to a banquet that I have prepared? Now, you got to understand, Esther is very deliberate. She's waiting for the timing just to be perfect. This is big stuff she has to deal with. And so she said, if you and Haman would come to the banquet that I have prepared for you, that would be wonderful. And so the king said, go get Haman as quick as you can. And they want Haman, and Haman comes. Oh, Haman, he is so excited. I mean, he is sucking in command, and he's getting his way. And now the king and the queen wants him to come to the banquet. Only he has been invited. Oh, man, this is the best day of my life. That's what Haman is thinking. And so he comes, and the king and the queen, they eating and drinking, and Haman. And then the king said, Esther, what do you want? What is your wish? Tell me your pleasure. I'll give anything up to half of the kingdom. And her timing is perfect. She said, if it pleases the king, would you come to a banquet tomorrow that I might give my request? Now, you understand the Persians, they were elaborate in the banquet. It wasn't just a day, it was several days, it was a week. So the king said, okay, we'll come tomorrow to your specially prepared banquet for Haman and myself. And Haman, he goes out. He's so excited, he's going to go home. He's going to tell his wife, you won't believe what's happened to me. I've been invited to this special banquet, just the king and the queen and me. Wow. And so on his way out, he passes by Mordecai. And as usual, Mordecai wouldn't bow to him. And it made Haman so mad it just mad. But he kept it within him. He restrained himself. He didn't show it. So he gets on home, and he gets his wife Zeresh and all his friends. And he begins to telling him, I'm rich. And he was rich. He had money all over the place. And he said he had 10 sons. It was a great honor to have big families, and he had 10 sons that were following in his footsteps. And I had been promoted to be the viceroy, to be the prime minister of the whole region. I'm great. And tomorrow, you won't believe this, tomorrow, I get to go to the banquet where only the king and the queen will be. Wow! But he said, it doesn't mean anything, because there's this guy Mordecai that won't bow down to me, and it bugs me. I'm mad. I can't stand it anymore. Every time I go by, he won't look at my way, and he won't bow down. He won't respect me in any way. Well, Zeresh, his wife and his friends, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you build a gallows, remember that big pole, 75 feet in the air, high above the tree, and tomorrow when you go to the king, just get permission to hang that Mordecai on that pole and pale him up there. Well, he thought that was a great idea. So he gave order to build that pole, to build that gallows. And he went to bed. He slept like a baby. I mean, this is going to be the best day of my life. And so he went to sleep real good because he's going to get up early in the morning. Wow. Chapter 6. Chapter 6 begins over in the palace on the other side of town where King Ahasuerus is there. And King couldn't sleep. He was wide awake. And so, as often the case is, bring some literature, maybe reading will put me to sleep. And it just happened to be they brought the books in, and they began reading. And it just happened to be that they tell this story about Mordecai who saved the life of the king 5 years ago. And the king said, What have we done to honor this guy that did this? And the servant said, nothing. We didn't send him a box of candy. We didn't even send him a thank you note. We did nothing. The king said, who's that out there in the court? Well, it's Haman. You know, Haman, he's up at the crack of dawn because he can't wait to tell, he's on his way to tell the king, ask the king, I want to kill Mordecai. And so Haman comes in and he's all excited because he thinks this is going to be a great day. And the king said, hey, Haman, I want to honor somebody. What would you recommend of doing the delight that I want to honor a special person? And Haman said, man, you know, who would he want to honor any more than me? I mean, he's going to honor me. Well, he said, this is what I would do. The man that you want to honor. I'd get a horse that you have ridden on. I would get a robe that you wore, and I put a crest on the horse's head. I'd get your high-ranking official and have that man put on that horse with that robe, and I'd have that high-ranking official parade that guy all the way around and proclaiming, this is the way the king wants to honor a man like this. Now get this. The king said, that's a great idea, Haman. I want you to do that very thing and do it to Mordecai. Are you talking about being hit in the gut or blindsided by a plank on the side of the head? He didn't see this coming. He's going to honor the guy that he hates, that he came to have him hang on the gallows? Well, anyway, he had no choice. He got the horse, he got the robe, he paraded him around. It seemed like an eternity. It was probably only a few minutes proclaiming, here's a guy that the king wants to honor. It was Mordecai, his enemy. Anyway, he finally got that done. He told his servant, take the horse and the robe and take that all back. Now, Mordecai, a humble guy, he just goes back to work. No big deal for him. But Haman, he covers his head. He runs all the way home across town. He begins to cry and is weeping. He thought he'd get some sympathy from his wife, Zeresh. And Zeresh said, I want to tell you something. If Mordecai is a Jew, as you say he is, as you already begin to fall, you're not going to stand against these people. See, she knew a little bit about their history. And there was some power or force that always seemed to be there to help them out. Well, that's not what Haman wanted to hear. And just as he was hearing that news, a knock came on the door, and a servant come and said, I call it a stretch limo. It was a 7-hump camel that came and put him on the camel and take him over to the king palace. All right. I can live with this. Okay. I was humiliated yesterday. Let's get back to reality. I'm going to meet the queen today. It's going to be all right. So he goes into the queen. They eat and drink a little bit. And the king said, Esther, what do you want me to do? Tell me what you want to do. I'll give her half the kingdom. Now she knows this is the hour. She knows this is the time she needs to do it. She's laying on the couch, as was the custom of eating, and she was reclining in the couch, and with her finger she points at Haman, and she said something like this before that, O king, spare my life, and the life of my people. If you just sold me into slavery, we could live with that. But when the decree came, they're going to kill us all, I had to speak out. And the king said, who would dare do such a thing? Who is this guy that had this wicked plot in his mind? Well, if you were in the room and you could focus in on Haman, his face went from white pale. I mean, he knew he was in trouble, because then she points the finger at Haman and said, this man, this is the guy, the wicked Haman, the son of Hammedatha. Well, the king gets up. He's so mad. He's trying to control his temper. He loses his wrath. He goes out into the garden. And while he's out there meditating and letting off his steam, Haman knew he was in trouble. He was terrified. He knew he had it. And so he comes to Esther and he falls on her couch. He begs her to save his life. Please, Esther, help me. And just while he's doing that, the king comes back in from the garden, and he sees Haman falling on his wife. And he said, is this guy going to molest and assault my wife right in my presence? Now, there was a servant there, as many of them would wait on king. His name was Harbona. Not everybody liked Haman, and Harbona probably wasn't one of them. And he said, O king, Haman has set gallows up by his house, this pole. Why don't you hang him on that? And the king consented to hang him on the gallows. And that's the way chapter 7 ends. Now, chapter 8, the king and the queen are together, and she realizes that she has been given the belongings of Haman, like a criminal would give all his stuff, give to someone else. It was given to Esther. Esther finally tells the king that how she related to Mordecai. He is my adoptive father. He brought me up. And so the king has special relation to Mordecai. In fact, what he does in reality, he gives the position that Haman had to Mordecai. He's now the viceroy. He's now the prime minister. And she goes before the king and would you revoke the law? Because on the 13th day, the 12th month, all of our people will be killed. And he said, I can't do it. I've given you Haman. I killed the 10 sons, or killed Haman and gave his belonging to you, but I can't revoke it. It's the laws of the Medes of the Persians. But I tell you what, here's my signet ring. You and Mordecai get together and you decree a law that will overpower this other law. So they came up with this idea that on the 13th day, the 12th month, all the Jews could gather together and defend themselves and save their lives and take all the spoils of those who are trying to attack them. And so a decree was sent out. The horses were bred especially to get this message out throughout all the provinces. And of course, you can imagine how happy everybody was, excited, delighted, because now they can defend themselves. And many, many, many people became Jews for fear of the Jews. And so chapter 8 ends with this new decree going on. Chapter 9, at least the first half of the chapter, begins with this dreadful day that they've been dreading. The 13th day of the 12th month is here, but they can defend themselves. This was the day that the enemy of the Jews thought they're going to overpower the Jews, but the opposite takes place. And even the leaders of the province, the satrap, the governors, the officials, they all sided with the Jews because of fear of Mordecai. Remember, he's prime minister now. He had a great reputation, so many people began to defend and work with the Jews. And so that battle began on the 13th day. And the city of Shushan alone, there were 500 men that they were able to kill, and they killed all of the sons of Haman. And the king said, well, what else do you want, queen? And she said, give me one more day that we might defend ourselves. He said, granted permission. And also, I want the 10 sons of Haman that were killed impaled on a pole high up. The king said, your wish is granted. So on the 14th day in the city of Shushan, they went out and killed 300 more men, and 75,000 were killed in all the provinces, and not a Jew was taken, not a Jew was killed. And none of the Jews took any of the property they had the right to do, but all they want to do is defend their lives. And so the 13th day that took place. On the 14th day, they rested, they celebrated. It was a holiday. It was exciting because they were victorious. But it was on the 15th day in the city of Shushan, because they fought for 2 days, that they celebrated. They were happy. They gave gifts. It was victorious. Now, the second half of chapter 9 talks about the Feast of Purim. The Feast of Purim. It was called the Feast of Purim because after the lot of Pur. And Mordecai said, this day should not be forgotten. From this year forward, every year, this time of the month, I want all the Jews to celebrate what is called the Feast of Purim. Remembering the day that Haman was destroyed and the Jews were delivered because of the decree of Mordecai and Esther. And so there was an official decree that was sent out throughout all the land that on the 14th day and the 15th day that the celebration of the Feast of Purim, and it was a great feast. It's still being observed today. They celebrate it in Jewish home by reading the Megillah. They rattle. They have feasts. They dress up in costumes. They celebrate. Next year, it will be March 9th and 10th. It's something like our Easter. It's not always the same day. But it's a Feast of Purim, the day to celebrate when the Jews were saved and delivered. Now, chapter 10 is very brief. It's about Mordecai. He was a good man. Haman was an evil man. But Mordecai was a good man. And he desired to do all he could for the good of the people. And that's the end of the story, the old story that you can read more in detail in the book of Esther between Nehemiah. It's the Word of God. It's the inspired Word of God. Now, before we close our service, give me a few more minutes. On the screen, I like to share with you some lessons, some applications from the message of the Word of God. The first one is that the name of God is not mentioned, but God is in the story and is always in control. The sovereign God oversees history is evident throughout the story. No mention of God, no mention of prayer, no mention of Christ, no mention of the Holy Spirit. Sometimes we live in a pagan world like Persia. We hear very little about God, and we wonder, is God really in control? Yes, God's in control. He's writing the story. He's orchestrating things. We need to see that in that story, even though his name is not there. You can rest assured, as you live in America or wherever you might be living today, that God is in control. He's in charge. He's writing the story. The second lesson I want us to learn is the day of judgment is coming. Reckoning will come to those who do evil. Haman, he was judged. Unsaved people will receive their judgment. The evil people of our world will have the judgment. In fact, we also need to remind ourselves that Christians will be judged as well. Not whether we are saved or not, but how have we lived for the Lord. We'll stand before the judgment seat when there is accountability in our life, whether you are saved or unsaved. There is a day of reckoning coming. Lesson number 3, God, who is always faithful, will protect his chosen people. Isn't it amazing that the Jewish people survived these centuries and the power of God that has preserved them? He will care for the Jews and will fulfill his promise to them, as he did in the book of Esther. Lesson number 4, responding in wrath will only lead to more calamity. You read this book of Esther, the Megillah, and you'll find the king got mad, people get mad. It never leads to good decision. Maybe there is such a thing as righteous indignation, but we need to be very careful that we do not become angry. Number 5, it's the Lord, not luck, not chance or happenstance. It's God orchestrating event in the lives of his people. It was God that it just happened to be when the eunuch was reading the chronicle that he came across this record that was happened 5 years ago. God planned that. It just happened that Haman happened to be outside waiting to get in. Those things weren't luck or coincidence. It was orchestrated by God. As you read this story, remember that God's in control. It's not luck. God is always at work. Number 6, there's a time to publicly identify yourself as God's people. I want you to know that Esther and Mordecai are not heroes. They're not in the Hall of Fame in Hebrews chapter 11. They didn't fulfill everything that they should have. We might even think they should have been back in Israel, where all the other people, many of the other people. So we aren't trying to make Mordecai and Esther. They hid their identity. We need to let people know we are Christians. We need to let people that we are children of God and suffer the consequences, whatever that might mean, in whatever kind of culture we live in. God will protect us. Lesson number 7, one needs to totally trust God in dire predicaments. They were through some tough times. You go through tough times. You trust God. He might be silent. You might not see him written on the pages, but you trust God during those difficult times, as the Jews went through some difficult times. Number 8, give God the victory. Nevertheless, he wants us to be engaged. He told the Jews on the 13th day of the 12th month, you go out there and defend yourself and save your life. Now, they didn't take any of the possessions because they just wanted to live. And we need to be involved, engaged, even though God is the one that gives the victory. Lesson number 9, use your position in life to accomplish what maybe only you can do. The queen used the position of being the queen to be able to go into the king. Whatever your position is, you are placed there by God to fulfill a certain aspect that only you could fulfill. Take advantage of that. Lesson number 10, spend your life doing good for others and not to advance selfish ambition, as we saw in Haman. Isn't it interesting, lesson number 11? The Messiah, the Savior, our Redeemer was assured because God saved the Jewish race from extinction. Isn't it wonderful that if Haman's plot was totally completed, there would be no Jews and no Messiah that would come from the Jewish race. Number 12, comprehend God's will and do all you can to be in it. Number 13, evil versus good, God versus Satan is an ongoing conflict. Evil never goes away. It's always there. It's always good against bad. It's always God against Satan. It's true in our lifetime. We're going to find that evil wherever you are. It's a truth or concept that we need to understand. Number 14, selfishness and egotism, pride and arrogance will go before a fall or a hanging. Haman is a very arrogant, all he thought about was himself. If that's your attitude, be ready for a hanging. Be ready for a fall. Number 15, Christians should joyfully remember God's protection and deliverance in their lives, knowing that God is in absolute control. We don't observe as Gentiles the Feast of Purim, but we ought to rejoice that God has saved us and delivered us and keep us alive and allows us even to be here this morning. Number 16, Iran is the location of ancient Persia. Haman has returned. The Ayatollah repeatedly declared that Israel must be destroyed and annihilated. They often will say, death to the Jews. Haman has come back. The next slide will show the picture of that land that was the Persian, and where you see Iran on the map, that's where Persia headquarters was. The wicked Persian is still there doing its evil deed, trying to kill the Jews even today. Lesson number 17, love as God's people, love and favor the Jews. For generations, the Jews have been hated, persecuted, and mistreated, but they still survive. We should love our Jews. Pray that they would see the Messiah. Do what we can as we think about the future that God has for that nation. And number 18, we live in a wicked world. We live in a wicked world. Put your faith in Christ to save you. He will preserve you now and for all eternity.